When Sarah Mitchell brought two shivering boys in from the brutal cold, she expected nothing more than to save them from frostbite. Instead, she watched a billionaire collapse in tears as the children he'd been searching for through 8 months of hell called him daddy and ran into his arms. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Sometimes compassion is the most dangerous thing you can offer. For Sarah Mitchell, a 28-year-old waitress working double shifts to keep her small apartment, kindness was simply in her nature. For Marcus Thornhill, a man who had built an empire on calculated decisions and emotional distance, witnessing that kindness would shatter the carefully constructed walls around his heart. She was just trying to get through another brutal winter evening. He was just another wealthy patron insulated from the harsh realities beyond the restaurant's warm glow. But when she opened that door to two shivering boys standing in the snow, she unknowingly opened a door to a truth that would force a billionaire to confront the greatest failure of his life. This isn't a story about charity. This is about the moment when a simple act of humanity exposed the vast chasm between wealth and worth, and how sometimes the poorest among us are the richest in the things that truly matter. The winter wind howled through the streets with a vengeance that seemed almost personal. It was the kind of cold that found every gap in your clothing, every exposed inch of skin, and punished you for daring to be outside. The temperature had plummeted to 15 degrees, and the weather reports were calling it the worst cold snap in 20 years. Inside La Maison Dorée, none of that mattered. The restaurant was a bubble of warmth and opulence, insulated from the cruel world outside by thick walls, heavy curtains, and the kind of money that made discomfort seem like a choice rather than an inevitability. Sarah Mitchell moved between the tables with practiced grace, her movements efficient and unobtrusive. She had been working at La Maison Dorée for 3 years, long enough to know that the clientele didn't want to see her. Not really. They wanted their food to appear, their glasses to stay full, and their experience to be seamless. To most of them, she was part of the furniture, animate but unremarkable. The restaurant was in its evening rhythm, that sweet spot between the early dinner crowd and the late-night wine enthusiasts. The lighting was deliberately dim, casting everything in a golden glow that made the crystal glasses sparkle and the silverware gleam. Soft classical music played from hidden speakers, just loud enough to provide ambiance without interfering with conversation. Sarah's feet ached in her practical black shoes. She'd been on them for 6 hours already with 4 more to go. Her lower back had that familiar knot of tension, and her shoulders carried the weight of too many trays, too many orders, too many forced smiles. But she needed this job. Her landlord had raised the rent again, her student loans were a constant shadow, and her car had made an ominous grinding sound that morning that promised an expensive repair bill in her near future. So she smiled, she served, and she endured. At table 7, a group of 4 sat in animated conversation. The man at the head of the table commanded attention without seeming to try. Marcus Thornhill was in his late 50s, with silver hair swept back from a patrician face and eyes that were a startling shade of gray. He wore his wealth like a second skin, comfortable and unquestioned. His suit was bespoke, his watch was worth more than Sarah made in a year, and his bearing radiated the quiet confidence of a man who had never been told no in any meaningful way. He was dining with his attorney, his financial advisor, and a woman Sarah assumed was either a business associate or a companion. Their conversation was low and serious, punctuated by occasional knowing laughs. Sarah had served Marcus Thornhill before. He was a regular, though not a frequent one. He came perhaps once a month, always impeccably dressed, always courteous in that distant professional way that suggested good breeding rather than genuine warmth. He tipped exactly 20%, never more, never less. He never sent food back, never raised his voice, and never really looked at her. To him, she was a function, not a person. She was refilling their water glasses when she heard it. A sound so faint she almost missed it beneath the music and the murmur of conversation. A tapping, soft, hesitant, almost apologetic. She glanced toward the front of the restaurant. Quote, the heavy wooden door with its etched glass window framed a scene that made her heart clench. 2 boys stood outside on the street, visible through the frosted glass. They couldn't have been more than 7 and 9 years old. They wore thin jackets, inadequate for the brutal cold, and their small hands were pressed against the glass. One of them was tapping, a gentle, persistent knock that seemed to contain all the desperate hope of childhood. Sarah's first instinct was immediate and visceral. Those children were freezing. She could see their breath fogging the glass, could see the way they hunched against the wind, could see the redness of their exposed faces. Her second instinct, learned from 3 years in the service industry, was more cautious. The restaurant had rules. The manager, Philip Duval, was a fastidious man who prided himself on maintaining La Maison Dorée's reputation. The clientele paid for an experience, he often said, and that experience did not include disruption. Street kids, beggars, anyone who might make the wealthy patrons uncomfortable were to be politely but firmly turned away. But those boys were so small, and it was so cold. Sarah glanced around the dining room. Philip was in the back, probably in his office, going over the evening's receipts. The other waitstaff were occupied with their own table. No one else had noticed the boys yet. She made a decision, kind that seems small in the moment but carries the weight of inevitability. She set down her water pitcher on the nearest station and walked toward the front door. The blast of cold air that hit her when she opened the door was shocking, a physical assault that stole her breath. The boys looked up at her together with wide eyes, dark eyes that were too old for their young faces. They were shivering violently, their thin jackets doing nothing to protect them. The younger one had tears frozen on his cheeks, crystalline tracks that caught the light from inside the restaurant. The older boy, trying to be brave, had his arm around his brother as if his small body could provide any warmth. "Come inside, boys," Sarah said, her voice gentle but urgent. The words were out before she could think about the consequences, before she could consider the rules, before she could calculate the risk. "Come inside. You'll freeze out here." The boys didn't move immediately. They looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope, as if kindness was something they had learned not to trust. The older boy's lips moved, but no sound came out. He was shaking too hard to speak. Sarah reached out, taking each of them by the hand. Their small fingers were like ice in hers, so cold it was frightening. She pulled them gently over the threshold and closed the door behind them, shutting out the murderous wind. The warmth of the restaurant enveloped them. The boy stood just inside the entrance, dripping melted snow onto the polished marble floor, looking around with dazed wonder. They were clearly out of place among the white tablecloths and crystal chandeliers, their worn clothing and disheveled appearance a stark contrast to the refined elegance around them. Sarah led them to a small bench near the coat check, out of the main dining area, but still inside, still warm. "Wait here," she said softly, kneeling down so she was at their eye level. "I'm going to get you something warm to drink. Are you hungry?" The younger boy nodded, a tiny, jerky movement. The older one just stared at her, his dark eyes searching her face as if trying to understand why she was helping. Sarah stood and turned toward the kitchen, her mind already working through the logistics. She would get them some hot chocolate, maybe some bread and soup. She would figure out where they lived, call someone, make sure they got home safely. She would deal with Philip if he found out. She would accept whatever consequences came from breaking the rules, because those were children and they were freezing, and sometimes the right thing to do was so obvious that any other choice was unthinkable. But as she took her first step, she became aware of a change in the atmosphere of the dining room. The low hum of conversation had faltered, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. She turned back and saw that everyone was looking at the boys, and more specifically, she saw that Marcus Thornhill had risen from his seat at table 7. His face had gone completely white, drained of all color as if he had seen a ghost. His gray eyes were fixed on the two boys with an intensity that was almost frightening. His hand gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles had turned white, and his mouth opened and closed soundlessly, like a man struggling to breathe. The older boy saw him, and in that moment Sarah watched something extraordinary happen. The boy's face, which had been guarded and wary, transformed. His eyes widened, filled with a desperate, soul-deep longing. "Dad," the boy whispered. The word was barely audible, but in the silence of the restaurant it carried like a gunshot. Marcus Thornhill's legs seemed to give out, stumbled forward, catching himself on a chair, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The carefully composed Billionaire, the man who commanded boardrooms and controlled fortunes, was coming apart at the seams. His eyes were filling with tears, and his face was contorted with an anguish so raw, so profound, that Sarah felt like she was witnessing something intensely private, something that should not be seen by strangers. The younger boy started to run. He launched himself across the dining room with the thoughtless abandon of a child, his small legs carrying him as fast as they could, his arms outstretched. "Daddy," he sobbed. "Daddy, we found you." Marcus dropped to his knees on the expensive carpet, his arms opening to catch his son's. The impact of their small bodies against his was violent, desperate. He wrapped his arms around them, pulling them against his chest with a ferocity that spoke of a hunger that had been gnawing at him for far too long. He was crying openly now, great shuddering sobs that shook his entire body, tears streaming down his face and disappearing into the boy's hair as he pressed his face against them. "I'm sorry," he choked out, his voice broken and raw. "I'm so sorry. I looked everywhere. I never stopped looking. Oh God, I never stopped." The restaurant had become a tableau, frozen in shocked stillness. The other diners watched with expressions ranging from confusion to discomfort to dawning understanding. The staff stood motionless, unsure of what to do, and Sarah Mitchell stood near the entrance, her hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her own face, realizing that her simple act of kindness had just reunited a father with his lost children. The spell broke when Marcus Thornhill began to move. He pulled back slightly, just enough to look at his son's faces, his hands cupping their cheeks, his thumbs wiping away their tears even as his own continued to fall. His eyes roamed over every detail of their faces with the desperate intensity of a man trying to memorize something precious that had almost been lost forever. The older boy, the one who had whispered "Dad," was trembling. Not from the cold anymore, but from the overwhelming emotion of the moment. The younger one clung to his father's neck, his small body shaking with sobs that seemed too large for someone so small. "You're real," Marcus whispered, his voice hoarse and broken. "You're really here. I thought I'd never see you again." The older boy, fighting to maintain some composure, nodded. "We've been looking for you, Dad. We've been looking for so long." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He closed his eyes, his face contorting with pain. "I've been looking for you," he said fiercely. "Every day, every single day. I never gave up. I swear to you, I never gave up." Sarah became aware of movement beside her. Philip Duval had emerged from the back, drawn by the unusual silence in the dining room. He took in the scene with visible alarm, his carefully maintained composure cracking. His eyes darted from the boys to Marcus to Sarah. and she could see him calculating, trying to understand what had happened and how to manage it. He approached her with quick, purposeful steps. "Miss Mitchell, what is the meaning of this?" His voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the anger beneath it. "You know, the policy about bringing in people from the street." Before Sarah could respond, a voice cut through the air with the sharp authority of someone used to being obeyed. Marcus Thornhill had risen to his feet, his sons still clinging to him, one on each side. He had wiped his face with his hand, trying to regain some measure of composure, but his eyes were red-rimmed and his voice still shook slightly. "These are my sons," he said, each word carefully enunciated. "They have been missing for 8 months. 8 months of hell, of not knowing if they were alive or dead, of searching every corner of this city and beyond. And this woman," he gestured towards Sarah, his voice gaining strength and an edge of steel. "This compassionate, decent human being saw 2 freezing children and brought them inside. She gave them shelter when she could have looked the other way. She gave them warmth when the world outside would have killed them. And you are questioning her." Philip's face flushed red, a mixture of embarrassment and the realization that he had badly misjudged the situation. "Mr. Thornhill, I had no idea. I sincerely apologize. The restaurant's policy, it's not meant to. If I had known." Marcus held up a hand, silencing him. "Your policies are not my concern right now. My sons are." He looked down at the boys who were watching the exchange with wide eyes, still pressed close to their father as if afraid he might disappear if they let go. He turned his attention to the woman who had been dining with him, who had remained at the table, watching with a carefully neutral expression. "Elizabeth, I need you to call Dr. Reeves. Tell him it's urgent. I need him at my home within the hour. The boys need to be examined." The woman, Elizabeth, nodded crisply and pulled out her phone, moving toward the entrance to make the call. Marcus then looked at his attorney, a lean man in his 60s who had half risen from his seat. "David, I need you to contact Detective Morrison immediately. Tell her they're found. Tell her they're safe." The attorney's face showed a flash of profound relief. He nodded and also reached for his phone. "Of course, Marcus. Thank God. Thank God they're safe." The financial advisor, a younger man who looked somewhat out of his depth in the emotional chaos, simply sat frozen, clearly unsure of his role in this unfolding drama. Marcus turned back to Sarah, who had been standing silently, trying to process what was happening. The powerful man who had barely acknowledged her existence in all the time she had served him, now looked at her with an intensity that was almost overwhelming. "What is your name?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "Sarah," she said quietly. "Sarah Mitchell." "Sarah Mitchell," Marcus repeated, as if committing it to memory. "You saved my sons' lives tonight. You saw them in need and you helped them without hesitation, without knowing who they were or what it would mean. You did what," he paused, his voice breaking slightly, "what I couldn't do. You brought them home." The older boy tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, we need to tell you. About Mom. About what happened." At the mention of their mother, Marcus's face changed. A new wave of pain crashed over his features, followed by something that looked like fear. His hands tightened on his son's shoulders. "Where is your mother?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Is she? Are you?" The boys exchanged a look, a silent communication that spoke of shared trauma. The younger one buried his face in his father's side. The older one straightened slightly, taking on a responsibility that seemed far too heavy for his young shoulders. "Mom's in the hospital," he said, his voice steady despite the tears that still tracked down his cheeks. "She's been sick. That's why we had to leave. That's why we've been on the streets." Marcus looked like he might collapse again. "The hospital?" he repeated. "Which hospital? How long is she?" His voice failed him, unable to complete the terrible question. "She's going to be okay," the older boy said quickly. "The doctors said she's getting better, but we didn't have anywhere to go. The bad people, they took our house. They took everything. We've been trying to find you, but we didn't know where you were. We only knew you came to the city sometimes. So we've been looking every day, walking the streets, looking in restaurant windows, hoping we'd see." The story was emerging in fragments, pieces of a nightmare that Sarah could barely comprehend. Marcus's sons had been missing for 8 months, and during that time they had been on the streets searching for their father. The weight of that, the tragedy of it, was staggering. Marcus seemed to be holding himself together by sheer force of will. He straightened, his jaw setting in a hard line. "David," he called to his attorney, "change of plans. I need you to find out which hospital. Check every hospital in the city if you have to. Find their mother. Make sure she has the best care. Private room, whatever she needs. Cost is no object." The attorney nodded, already dialing. "I'm on it." Marcus looked around the restaurant, suddenly seeming to remember where they were. The other diners were still watching, some trying to be discreet about it, others openly staring. The moment was too raw, too private for such a public space. He needed to get his sons somewhere safe, somewhere warm, somewhere they could begin to heal. "We need to go," he said, looking down at the boys. "We need to get you home. But first we need to get you warm, get you fed properly, get you checked by a doctor." He turned to Sarah again. "Miss Mitchell, I don't know how to thank you. Words seem inadequate, doesn't even begin to cover it." Sarah shook her head, fresh tears spilling over. "I didn't do anything special. They were children, and they were cold. Anyone would have done the same." Marcus's expression was bitter, sad. "No," he said quietly, "not anyone. I've walked past dozens of people in need. I've looked the other way more times than I can count. I've been so focused on building my empire, on my businesses, on my success that I forgot what really matters. And it took losing everything that matters to teach me that lesson. He looked at his sons, his eyes filling again. I failed them. I failed their mother. I let my pride, my stubbornness, my need to be right tear my family apart. And when they needed me most, they were out in the cold, searching for me. The guilt in his voice was palpable, a weight that seemed to physically bow his shoulders. The older boy reached up and touched his father's face, a gesture of such simple compassion that it broke Sarah's heart. We found you now, Dad, the boy said. That's what matters. We found you. Marcus pulled both boys close again, holding them as if he could shield them from every hurt the world had ever inflicted on them. He stood there for a long moment, just breathing, just feeling their warmth, their solidity, the miracle of their presence. Then he straightened and Sarah saw the transformation. The broken man was pulling himself together, drawing on reserves of strength and control. He was still in pain, still reeling, but he was functioning. He had a purpose now. He had his sons back, and he would move heaven and earth to make things right. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. He extracted a business card and a pen, scribbling something on the back. He handed it to Sarah. This is my personal number, he said. I want you to call me tomorrow. There's a conversation we need to have about gratitude, about recompense, about making sure you never regret the choice you made tonight. Sarah looked at the card, then back at him. I don't need, she began, but he held up his hand. Please, he said, and there was something in his voice, a plea, a need. Let me do this. Let me try to show you what this means. What you've given me tonight, it's everything. It's my whole world. Tomorrow, call me tomorrow. Sarah took the card, her fingers closing around it. The thick paper, the embossed lettering. It felt substantial, real, a tangible reminder that what had just happened wasn't some fever dream brought on by exhaustion. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder, a brief touch that conveyed more gratitude than words ever could. Then he was moving, shepherding his sons toward the door, his associates following in his wake. Elizabeth had already arranged for his car to be brought around. The restaurant staff parted to let them through, and Sarah watched as Marcus knelt down one more time to wrap his coat around both boys before stepping out into the brutal cold. The heavy door closed behind them, and the spell that had held the restaurant in thrall broke. Conversation resumed, though it was animated now, full of speculation and wonder. Sarah stood frozen, still holding the business card, her mind struggling to catch up with what had just transpired. She had come to work expecting nothing more than another exhausting shift, another evening of aching feet and forced smiles. Instead, she had become part of something extraordinary, something that would undoubtedly change the course of multiple lives. Philip Duval approached her, his earlier anger completely evaporated, replaced by something that looked almost like awe. Miss Mitchell, he said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle, take the rest of the night off. With pay. He paused, searching for words. You've done something remarkable tonight. Sarah nodded numbly. Thank you, she managed. She untied her apron with trembling hands and hung it on its hook. As she gathered her coat and bag from the employee area, the other waitstaff clustered around her, full of questions and exclamations. But Sarah couldn't process it. She needed air, space, time to think. She stepped out into the winter night, and the cold hit her like it had hit her earlier, shocking and brutal. She pulled her coat tight and began walking toward the bus stop. Her mind was a whirlwind. Those two small boys with their thin jackets and their frozen tears. The way the older one had tried so hard to be brave. The sound of the younger one's voice when he'd cried daddy. And Marcus Thornhill, that pillar of wealth and power, brought to his knees by the return of what he'd lost. 8 months, she thought. 8 months those children had been missing. 8 months of searching, of not knowing, of hoping against hope. The bus ride home was a blur. Sarah stared out the window at the dark streets, seeing her own reflection superimposed over the passing cityscape. She thought about Marcus's words. I failed them. The raw guilt in his voice, the self-recrimination. What had happened to tear that family apart? How had two young boys ended up on the streets in the middle of winter, searching for a father who was searching for them? The questions multiplied, but there were no answers, only the weight of having witnessed something profoundly intimate and transformative. Her apartment was small and cold. She couldn't afford to keep the heat turned up high, so she usually bundled up in sweaters and blankets. Tonight, as she let herself in and locked the door behind her, the modest warmth felt like a luxury. She thought of those boys, how many nights they must have spent in the brutal cold, how frightened they must have been. She made herself a cup of tea and sat on her threadbare couch, Marcus's business card still clutched in her hand. She set her tea down and really looked at the card for the first time. The front was simple but elegant. Marcus Thornhill, Chief Executive Officer, Thornhill Industries. There was an office address and a phone number, but it was the back that held her attention. In strong, bold handwriting, he had written another number and a single word: personal. Sarah set the card on her small coffee table and wrapped her hands around her tea mug, seeking its warmth. She thought about tomorrow, about the call he'd asked her to make. What would they even talk about? He'd mentioned gratitude, recompense. The words made her uncomfortable. She hadn't helped those boys expecting anything in return. She'd done it because it was the right thing to do. The only thing to do. The idea of being rewarded for basic human decency felt wrong somehow. Transactional, but there had been something in his eyes, a desperate need to make amends, to balance some cosmic scale that had been weighted against him for 8 long months. Sleep didn't come as Healy that night. Sarah lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening's events over and over. She thought about the moment she'd opened the door, The decision that had seemed so small, so obvious. Come inside, boys. 3 words that had changed everything. She wondered where Marcus and his sons were now. Probably in some grand house, warm and safe, with doctors fussing over the boys and their father watching over them like a guardian angel who'd failed once and would never fail again. She hoped they were okay. She hoped the boys weren't too traumatized, that they could heal from whatever nightmare they'd endured. Morning came gray and cold. Sarah had barely slept, and when her alarm went off, she felt the exhaustion deep in her bones. But she got up, made coffee, and sat at her small kitchen table with Marcus's card in front of her. It was just past 8 in the morning. Too early to call? She wasn't sure of the protocol for calling billionaires, but he had said tomorrow, and it was tomorrow. She picked up her phone, stared at the numbers he'd written, and with a deep breath, she dialed. The phone rang twice before it was answered. Marcus Thornhill's voice came through, and she was struck by how different it sounded from the commanding tone he'd used in the restaurant. He sounded tired, drained, but there was an underlying current of something that might have been peace. "This is Marcus." Sarah cleared her throat. "Mr. Thornhill, it's Sarah Mitchell from the restaurant." There was a pause, and then his voice warmed perceptibly. "Sarah, thank you for calling. Thank you for everything. How are you?" The question seemed absurd. How was she? She wasn't the one who'd been through hell. "I'm fine," she said. "How are your son? How are you?" There was a long exhale on the other end of the line. "They're safe," he said, and she could hear the wonder in his voice, as if he still couldn't quite believe it. "Dr. Reeves examined them last night. They're malnourished, dehydrated, suffering from exposure. But they're gonna be okay. They're resilient," he said, his voice catching slightly. "They're so much stronger than I ever knew. They're sleeping now. I sat with them all night. I couldn't leave them. I kept thinking if I looked away, they'd disappear again." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so glad they're safe," she said quietly. "And their mother?" Marcus's voice shifted, becoming more complex, threaded with emotions Sarah couldn't quite parse. "We found her," he said. "She's at City General in the ICU. Pneumonia. Severe, but the doctors say she's past the worst of it. She should recover." Sarah heard something in his voice when he spoke of his wife, something painful and unresolved. "I'm glad," Sarah said, meaning it. "The boys need their mother. They need both of you." "Yes," Marcus said softly. "Yes, they do." There was a pause, a weight of unsaid things. "Sarah, I meant what I said last night. I need to do something to thank you properly, to show my gratitude." Sarah had been expecting this, but she still wasn't sure how to respond. "Mr. Thornhill, you don't need to do anything. I was just..." She searched for the right words. "I saw children who needed help, that's all." "That's not all," Marcus said, his voice firm. "You saw them when hundreds of other people walked past them. You brought them inside when it would have been easier, safer to follow the rules and turn them away. You gave me my sons back. You gave me a chance to be the father I should have been. That's not nothing, that's everything. Please, let me take you to lunch today. Let me tell you the whole story. Let me try to explain what this means." Sarah was silent, torn. Part of her wanted to refuse, to keep her distance from this man and his complicated world. But another part of her, the part that had lain awake all night wondering about the story behind those 2 boys, wanted to understand. She wanted to know how a family could fracture so completely, and she wanted to see for herself that Marcus Thornhill was okay, that he was going to be the father his sons needed. "Okay," she said finally. "Lunch. Where and when?" Marcus gave her the name of a restaurant, nothing ostentatious. "Quiet place," he said, "where they could talk." "Noon?" "Noon," she agreed. The rest of the morning passed in a strange haze. Sarah showered, dressed in the nicest clothes she owned, a simple dress and cardigan, and tried to prepare herself for the conversation ahead. She had no idea what to expect, what Marcus would tell her, what he wanted from her. She took the bus to the restaurant, arriving a few minutes early. It was indeed quiet, an upscale bistro, but without the intimidating grandeur of La Maison Dorée. Marcus was already there, seated at a corner table. He stood when he saw her, and she was struck by how different he looked. He was still impeccably dressed, but there was a weariness to him. Dark circles under his eyes, a heaviness in his movements that spoke of the emotional toll of the past day. "Sarah," he said, extending his hand. She shook it, feeling the firmness of his grip, the warmth of his skin. "Thank you for coming." They sat, and for a moment neither spoke. A server appeared, took their drink orders, and disappeared. Marcus looked at Sarah with those gray eyes, and she saw in them a vulnerability she hadn't seen in the restaurant when he'd been issuing commands and taking control. "I need to tell you how this happened," he said. "I need you to understand. Not because I want absolution. I don't deserve that. But because you deserve to know. You're part of this story now, whether either of us intended it." Sarah nodded, folding her hands in her lap. "I'm listening," she said. And so Marcus Thornhill began to speak. And the story he told was one of love, pride, mistakes, and the terrible price of being too stubborn to bend. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant, as if he were looking into the past and seeing ghosts there. "Her name is Catherine," he began. "Catherine Reeves. We met 15 years ago at a charity benefit. She was a social worker, passionate about helping at-risk youth. He smiled bitterly, exactly what I am now. A businessman focused on growth, on success, on building an empire. We were opposites in almost every way, but somehow we fit." She grounded me. She reminded me that there was more to life than quarterly earnings and market share, and I gave her stability, security, a platform to do more of the work she loved. The server returned with their drinks, and Marcus paused until she left. He took a sip of his water, gathering his thoughts. "We got married within a year. It was fast, but it felt right. Our sons, Michael and James, they came soon after. Michael is 9 now, James is 7, and for a while everything was perfect. I had my company, Catherine had her work, we had our boys. I thought I was giving them everything they needed. a beautiful home, the best schools, every advantage money could buy. I thought that was enough, but it wasn't, Sarah said quietly, understanding already where this was heading. Marcus met her eyes and nodded. It wasn't, because what they needed most was me, and I wasn't there. I was always at the office, always traveling, always chasing the next deal, the next acquisition. I told myself I was doing it for them, providing for them. But the truth is I was doing it for myself, for my ego, for the satisfaction of winning, of being more successful than my competitors, than my own father. Catherine tried to tell me. She asked me to slow down, to spend more time at home, to be present for the boys, but I didn't listen. I told her she didn't understand the pressures I was under, the responsibilities I carried. His hands tightened around his water glass. The arguments started small. Missed dinners, forgotten recitals, promises I didn't keep. Then they grew. She accused me of caring more about my company than my family. I accused her of not appreciating everything I provided. It became a pattern, a toxic cycle we couldn't break. And the worst part is she was right. She was right about everything, and I was too proud, too stubborn, too convinced of my own importance to admit it. The breaking point came 8 months ago, Marcus continued, his voice dropping lower. Catherine had organized a birthday party for James at our home. He was turning 7. She'd been planning it for weeks, talking about it constantly. The boys were so excited. I promised I would be there. I swore I wouldn't miss it. But there was a merger. A critical negotiation that had been months in the making. The other party could only meet that weekend. I told myself it was unavoidable, that I had no choice. I went to the meeting. I missed my son's birthday. Sarah could see the pain etched in every line of his face. When I got home that evening, the house was dark. The decorations were still up. Balloons and streamers. A cake with 7 candles that had never been lit. Catherine was in the living room, just sitting there in the dark. The boys were in bed, James crying himself to sleep. I tried to apologize, tried to explain, but she just looked at me with these empty eyes and said, "You made your choice, Marcus. You've been making the same choice for years, and I can't do this anymore." "What happened then?" Sarah asked gently. Marcus rubbed his face with his hand, the weariness seeming to deepen. "She told me she was taking the boys and leaving. Not forever," she said. "Just for a while. She needed space to think, to figure out if there was anything left worth saving. She was going to take them to her sister's place a few hours upstate. She asked me not to fight her on it, said if I really loved them, I'd give them the space they needed. And I, in my arrogance and my wounded pride, I told her, fine, go, run away. But don't expect me to be waiting when you come crawling back." The words seemed to physically pain him to speak. Sarah could see him reliving the moment, the terrible finality of it. They left the next morning, he continued. Catherine packed the boys into her car with a few suitcases. Michael looked at me with these accusing eyes. James just cried. I stood in the driveway and watched them drive away, and I told myself I was right, that I was justified, that she was overreacting, being dramatic. I went back to work. I threw myself into the business even harder, determined to prove that I didn't need them, that I was fine on my own. "But you weren't fine," Sarah said. Marcus shook his head. "I wasn't. The house was empty, silent. I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing James's face when I'd missed his party, kept hearing Catherine's voice when she said I'd made my choice. After a week, I tried to call her. No answer. I tried again and again, nothing. I drove to her sister's place. They weren't there. Her sister said Catherine had called, said they were fine, but that she needed more time. She wouldn't tell me where they were. I hired investigators. I filed missing person reports, though the police said they weren't technically missing if the mother had taken them. I searched for 2 months. Spending a fortune, using every resource I had. Nothing. Then I got a call from a hospital," Marcus said, his voice breaking slightly. "Catherine had been admitted with pneumonia. She was alone. The boys weren't with her. She was delirious, barely conscious. And when the hospital staff found my name as her emergency contact, they called me. I rushed there, and when I finally saw her, when she was lucid enough to speak, she told me what had happened. She'd been trying to make it on her own, too proud to come back to me, too ashamed to admit she couldn't handle it alone. She'd been staying with friends, but when those arrangements fell through, she'd ended up in a shelter. She'd been looking for work, trying to provide for the boys, but without references, without a support system, it had been impossible. Sarah felt her heart breaking for this family, for all the ways pride and stubbornness had torn them apart. "Where were the boys?" she asked. Marcus's face contorted with anguish. She'd left them with someone she thought she could trust, a woman from the shelter who'd seemed kind, who'd offered to watch them while Catherine went to job interview. But when Catherine collapsed and was taken to the hospital, the woman panicked. She was undocumented, afraid of any contact with authorities. She left the boys at a police station with a note saying their mother was sick and at City General, but she didn't include any names, any details. The police tried to track Catherine down through the note, but by that time she was in the ICU, unconscious, unable to tell them who she was for days. And the boys, terrified of being separated, ran. They ran, Sarah repeated, the horror of it sinking in. 2 young boys, alone and scared. Marcus nodded. Michael told me last night that they were afraid of being put into foster care, of being separated from each other. They knew I was in the city because Catherine had mentioned it before, so they decided to find me. A 9-year-old and a 7-year-old living on the streets, searching for their father. They slept in doorways and shelters when they could find space. scrounged for food, begged sometimes. Michael protected James every single day, keeping him safe, keeping him hopeful, and I had no idea. I was searching for them everywhere except where they actually were, right under my nose in my own city. The pain in his voice was almost unbearable. Sarah reached across the table and placed her hand over his. "You didn't know," she said. "You couldn't have known." Marcus looked at her hand on his, then up at her face. "That's the thing," he said hoarsely. "I should have known. If I had been the father I should have been, if I had put them first, if I had listened to Catherine, none of this would have happened. The boys spent 8 months in hell because of my pride. Because I couldn't admit I was wrong. Because I chose my ego over my family." "But you're choosing differently now," Sarah said firmly. "You have a second chance, Marcus. Not many people get that. Your sons are safe. Catherine is going to recover. You can rebuild what was broken." Marcus looked at her with something like hope struggling against the weight of his guilt. "Can I?" he asked. "Can you rebuild trust after you've shattered it so completely? Can you make up for 8 months of terror, of abandonment?" Sarah squeezed his hand. "I don't know," she said honestly, "but I know you have to try. Those boys love you. I saw it in their faces. They searched for you for 8 months. They never gave up on you. Now you have to prove you won't give up on them." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Then he took a shaky breath. "Catherine is awake now," he said. "I saw her this morning before I came here. She was too weak to talk much, but she looked at me and said, 'I'm sorry.' Can you imagine? After everything I did, everything I failed to do, she apologized. I told her we would talk when she was stronger, that right now all that mattered was that she healed, that we were all together. But Sarah, I don't know if she'll forgive me. I don't know if I can forgive myself." "You're human," Sarah said gently. "You made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but you love your family. That was obvious last night. That has to count for something." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'm going to do everything differently," he said, and there was steel in his voice now. "I'm stepping back from the company. My board was shocked when I told them this morning, but I don't care. I'm making David the acting CEO. I'm going to be there for my sons. I'm going to earn back Catherine's trust if it takes the rest of my life. And I'm going to make sure that no matter what happens between Catherine and me, those boys know they are loved, they are safe, and they will never be abandoned again." Sarah felt tears in her eyes. "That's all they need," she said. "That's all any child needs." Marcus looked at her with profound gratitude. "You showed me that," he said. "You, a waitress working double shifts, barely making ends meet. You saw 2 children in need and you didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate the cost or the risk. You just helped them. I have all the money in the world and I didn't see them. I walk past people in need every single day and I never saw them, but you did. You have something I lost somewhere along the way and I need to find it again." "It's not lost," Sarah said. "It's just buried. But you can dig it back up. You can be the man your family needs you to be." The server approached to take their orders and the spell of the moment broke slightly. They ordered, though Sarah suspected neither of them would taste the food. When the server left, Marcus looked at her again. "I meant what I said, Sarah. I want to do something for you. You gave me everything. Let me give you something in return." Sarah shook her head. "Mr. Thornhill, Marcus, you don't owe me anything. Seeing your face when you found your sons, that was enough. That was everything. I don't need money or rewards. I just need to know that those boys are going to be okay." Marcus studied her and she saw respect in his eyes and something else, perhaps a recognition of kindred spirit. "You're remarkable," he said quietly, "but please let me do this, not as payment, as thanks. I'll feel better knowing I've helped you the way you helped me." "What do you need, Sarah? What would make your life easier?" Sarah thought about her rent, her student loans, her car that was dying, but shaking her head again felt wrong, ungracious. "Maybe," she said slowly, "if you're serious, maybe you could help me with my student loans. I've been paying them for 6 years and I barely made a dent." Marcus nodded immediately. "Consider them paid. What else?" Sarah started to protest, but he held up his hand. "Please," he said, "indulge me. I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes, and right now, using it to help someone who saved my children is the only thing that feels meaningful." Sarah felt overwhelmed by his generosity, by the sheer magnitude of what he was offering. Her mind raced through all the ways her life could change with financial stability, the weight she carried every day, the constant calculation of whether she could afford groceries and rent, the anxiety of one unexpected expense destroying everything. All of it could simply disappear. It was dizzying. "My car," she said finally, "it's dying, and my rent, it keeps going up and I can barely make it each month. And," she hesitated, feeling vulnerable, "my mother, she's in a nursing home. The care is expensive and I can barely cover half. The state covers the rest, but the facility isn't very good. I'd love to move her somewhere better, somewhere she'd be happy." Marcus pulled out his phone and began typing notes. "Consider all of it done," he said. "The car, the rent, your mother's care. I'll have my assistant arrange everything. You'll have a new car by the end of the week. As for rent, I own several apartment buildings in the city. You'll have a place, a good place, rent-free for as long as you need it, and your mother will have the best care available. I'll personally insure it." Sarah felt tears spilling down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, embarrassed. "I don't know what to say. Thank you doesn't seem like enough." "Say you'll accept it," Marcus said gently. "Say you'll let me do this. Not just for you, but for me. I need to believe that something good can come from all of this pain. You're that good thing, Sarah. You're the reminder that there are still people in this world who see suffering and choose to act." Sarah nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She had spent so long struggling, so long carrying the weight alone, that the idea of someone helping her felt almost unreal. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of gratitude and grief and hope hanging between them. Their food arrived and they ate slowly. the conversation shifting to lighter topics. Marcus asked about her life, genuinely interested in her story. She told him about growing up in a small town, about her dreams of becoming a teacher that had been derailed by her father's death and the subsequent financial collapse, about taking the waitressing job as a temporary solution that had become permanent, about her mother's decline into dementia and the heartbreak of watching her forget. Marcus listened with an attentiveness that felt rare, precious. He asked questions, remembered details, treated her story as if it mattered. It was such a stark contrast to how most of the wealthy patrons at La Maison Dorée treated her, as if she were invisible, that it moved her deeply. Here was a man who had been brought to his knees by loss and was learning, slowly, painfully, to see the world differently. When lunch was over, Marcus insisted on driving her home. His car was waiting outside, a sleek black sedan with a driver. Sarah climbed into the back seat, feeling out of place in such luxury. The leather was soft, the interior warm and quiet. Marcus sat beside her, and as they drove through the city streets, he pointed out the building where his office was, the hospital where Catherine was recovering, the shelter where his sons had sometimes stayed during their ordeal. Each location was a landmark in his personal geography of failure and redemption. When they reached Sarah's apartment building, a modest structure in a neighborhood that was one step above rough, Marcus looked at it with a critical eye. "I meant what I said," he told her. "You'll have a better place within the week." Sarah smiled. "I've lived here for 4 years. It's not much, but it's home." Marcus shook his head. "You deserve better. Everyone deserves better than just surviving. They deserve to live." He handed her another card, this one with his assistant's information. "Call Jennifer tomorrow. She arranged everything. And Sarah," he paused, his gray eyes serious, "I want you to meet the boys properly. When Catherine is stronger, when things are more settled, I want them to thank you themselves. I want them to know who saved them." Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety mixed with pleasure at the thought. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like to know they're okay." "They will be," Marcus said, and for the first time since she'd met him, he smiled. It was a real smile, touched with sadness, but genuine. "Because of you, they will be." Sarah climbed out of the car, and as she watched it pull away, she felt as if she were standing at a crossroads. Her life, which had seemed so fixed, so unchangeable in its struggle, was suddenly full of possibility. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, each step feeling lighter than before. The next few days passed in a whirlwind. Jennifer, Marcus's assistant, was efficient and kind. She called Sarah the very next day, and within 48 hours, Sarah's student loans were paid in full. The confirmation email arrived in her inbox, and she stared at it for 20 minutes, reading it over and over, unable to believe it was real. The balance, which had been a crushing weight of nearly $60,000, now read zero. She had called Jennifer, her voice shaking, asking if there had been some mistake. "No mistake," Jennifer had assured her warmly. "Miss, Thornhill takes care of the people who matter to him, and you matter very much." The car arrived on Thursday, delivered right to her apartment building. It was a modest sedan, nothing ostentatious, but it was new and reliable, and when Sarah sat in the driver's seat and felt the smooth steering wheel under her hands, she wept. She drove it immediately to the nursing home where her mother lived, desperate to share the news. Her mother, Eleanor Mitchell, was in the common room when Sarah arrived, sitting in a wheelchair by the window. Dementia had stolen so much of her, but there were still moments of clarity, brief windows when Sarah could see her real mother looking back at her. "Mom," Sarah said, kneeling beside the wheelchair, "I have good news. We're going to move you to a better place, somewhere nice with gardens and good food and people who will take care of you properly." Eleanor looked at her with cloudy eyes, and for a moment Sarah wasn't sure she understood. Then her mother's hand, thin and spotted with age, reached out and touched Sarah's cheek. "My good girl," Eleanor whispered, "always trying to save everyone. Don't forget to save yourself." The words pierced Sarah's heart. Even in her diminished state, her mother saw her, understood her. Sarah took her mother's hand and held it gently. "I'm okay, I promise. Things are going to be better now." By the following week, Eleanor had been moved to Meadowbrook Senior Living, a facility that was worlds apart from the state-run home where she'd been. The rooms were spacious and filled with natural light. The staff was attentive and kind. There were activities, music therapy, beautiful gardens where residents could walk. When Sarah visited her mother in the new place, Eleanor was sitting in a comfortable armchair in her private room, looking out at a garden full of spring flowers. The change in her was subtle but noticeable. She seemed calmer, more present. Sarah sat with her for hours, reading aloud from one of her mother's favorite books, and several times she caught her mother smiling. Sarah's own new apartment was in a building Marcus owned in a much better neighborhood, bright and spacious with actual counter space in the kitchen and a bathroom that didn't have mold in the corners. She moved her few belongings in over a weekend, marveling at the reality of it. She kept expecting someone to tell her there had been a mistake, that she had to go back to her old life, but no one did. This was her life now, transformed by a single moment of compassion. She had gone back to work at La Maison Dorée, though Philip had told her she could take as much time as she needed. But Sarah liked the routine, the familiarity, and she found that the other staff treated her differently now. They looked at her with respect, even a kind of awe. She was the waitress who'd saved the billionaire's sons. The story had spread through the restaurant community like wildfire. 2 weeks after the night that had changed everything, Sarah received a call from Marcus. His voice sounded lighter than it had at lunch, touched with something that might have been hope. Sarah, I wanted to give you an update. Catherine came home from the hospital yesterday. She's still weak, but she's recovering well. And the boys, he paused, and she could hear the emotion in his voice. They're starting to heal. We've been seeing a family therapist, all of us together. It's hard facing everything that happened, but it's necessary. They're sleeping through the night now. They're laughing again. Michael even made a joke at dinner last night. It was the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. Sarah smiled, tears in her eyes. I'm so happy for you, Marcus. You're doing the right thing. There's something else, Marcus continued. Catherine wants to meet you. She wants to thank you. And the boys, they talk about you constantly. They call you the Angel Lady. Would you come to dinner? Next Saturday if you're free. Nothing formal, just a family meal. I think it would mean a lot to all of us. Sarah felt nervous excitement flutter in her chest. I'd love to, she said. Thank you for inviting me. The week leading up to the dinner felt impossibly long. Sarah changed her outfit a dozen times. Unsure what to wear to a billionaire's home for a family dinner, she finally settled on a simple dress, nothing too formal, and drove her new car to the address Marcus had given her. The house was in an exclusive neighborhood, set back from the road behind a gate. It was large, elegant, but not as ostentatious as she'd feared. There was something warm about it, lights glowing in the windows, flowers in the garden. She rang the bell, her heart pounding. The door opened, and there was Marcus, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him. Sarah, welcome. Come in. She stepped inside, and the house enveloped her in warmth and the smell of something delicious cooking. Marcus led her through a hallway lined with family photos into a large kitchen where a woman stood at the stove. She was thin, too thin, and moved with the careful slowness of someone still recovering. But when she turned and saw Sarah, her face lit up with a smile that transformed her. You must be Sarah, she said, setting down her spoon and moving forward. Her voice was soft but warm. I'm Catherine. I can't thank you enough for what you did for my boys, for our boys. Sarah took her outstretched hand and Catherine pulled her into a gentle hug. You saved them, Catherine whispered. You saved my babies. I will never forget that. Never. Sarah hugged her back, feeling the fragility of this woman who had been through so much. You would have done the same, Sarah said. Any mother would have. Catherine pulled back, her eyes shining with tears. But you're not their mother, and you still did it. That makes you extraordinary. Before Sarah could respond, she heard the thunder of small feet on stairs, and then two boys burst into the kitchen. Michael and James, cleaned up and healthy, looking so different from the terrified, frozen children she'd met in the restaurant doorway. They skidded to a stop when they saw her, suddenly shy. It's her, James whispered to his brother. It's the Angel Lady. Sarah knelt down, bringing herself to their level. Hi, boys, she said gently. It's good to see you again. Michael, the older one, stepped forward. His dark eyes were serious. Too serious for a 9-year-old. Thank you, he said, his voice formal, rehearsed. Thank you for helping us. We were really scared and cold, and you let us come inside. You saved us. Sarah felt her throat tighten. You were very brave, she told him. You took care of your brother. You never gave up. That's what saved you. James moved forward then, and without warning, he wrapped his small arms around Sarah's neck. You're nice, he said simply. I like you. Sarah held James close, feeling the complete trust in his small embrace, and she had to blink back tears. I like you too, sweetheart, she said softly. Dinner was an unexpectedly joyful affair. They ate at a large wooden table in a dining room that managed to feel both elegant and comfortable. Catherine had made roast chicken with vegetables, simple but delicious, and the boys ate with the enthusiasm of children who were finally safe enough to enjoy food again. The conversation flowed naturally, punctuated by the boys' chatter about their new school, the therapy dog they'd met at their counseling sessions, and the treehouse Marcus had promised to build in the backyard. Sarah watched the family interact and saw the careful tenderness between Marcus and Catherine. They didn't touch often, but when they did, when Marcus handed Catherine a serving dish or when Catherine brushed past him to refill the water pitcher, there was a gentleness that spoke of people trying to find their way back to each other. It wasn't the easy intimacy of a couple secure in their love, but rather the tentative reconnection of two people who had been broken and were learning to trust again. Marcus caught Sarah watching them once, and he gave her a small, almost shy smile as if to say, we're trying. After dinner, the boys insisted on showing Sarah their rooms. Michael's was filled with books and model airplanes. James's with stuffed animals and drawings taped to the walls. Many of the drawings were of their time on the streets, rendered in the stark honesty of childhood. Sarah saw pictures of doorways and alleys, of the two boys huddled together under a blanket, of strangers walking past without seeing them. But there were also newer drawings, brighter ones, of the family together, of a treehouse, of a dog they hoped to get. The contrast was heartbreaking and hopeful in equal measure. We drew pictures of you too, James said, pulling Sarah over to his desk. He showed her a drawing of a woman with yellow hair, like Sarah's, opening a door. There were two small figures standing in snow, and coming from the woman's mouth was a speech bubble that said, "Come inside, boys." Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, overwhelmed. This is beautiful, James, she managed. Can I keep it? James nodded eagerly. Michael showed her his own drawing, more detailed and realistic. It showed the same scene, but from a different angle, capturing the moment when they'd first seen their father through the restaurant windows. You can see Dad's face here, Michael explained, pointing. He looked so surprised. We were scared he wouldn't recognize us. We'd been looking for so long. Did you ever think about giving up? Sarah asked gently. The boys exchanged a glance. That silent communication she'd noticed before. Sometimes, Michael admitted, when it was really cold or when people were mean to us or when we were really hungry, but James needed me to be strong, and I knew Dad was looking for us too. Mom always said Dad never gave up on anything, so I couldn't give up either. The faith in his voice, the absolute certainty that his father would find them, made Sarah's heart ache. Children shouldn't have to be that strong, that brave. But these two had been, and they'd survived. Marcus appeared in the doorway. Boys, time to let Miss Sarah enjoy her coffee. Say goodnight. Both boys hugged her. James with his characteristic enthusiasm, Michael with more reserve but no less sincerity. Thank you for being our friend, Michael said quietly. Sarah kissed the top of his head. Always, she promised. Downstairs, Catherine had made coffee and set out a plate of cookies in the living room. They sat in comfortable chairs arranged around a fireplace where a low fire crackled. The atmosphere was peaceful, domestic, a far cry from the drama of their first meeting. Marcus sat close to Catherine, and Sarah noticed how his hand rested on the arm of her chair, not quite touching her but close, as if seeking permission. Catherine spoke first, her voice thoughtful. The therapist told us something this week that's been on my mind, she said. She said that sometimes the worst things that happen to us can crack us open in ways that let the light in, that we can either let the cracks destroy us or we can use them to become something stronger, something more whole. She looked at Marcus, her eyes soft but serious. I think that's what we're trying to do. Use the cracks to rebuild something better. Marcus nodded, his throat working. I was so closed off before, he said. So convinced that strength meant never showing weakness, never admitting failure. I built walls around myself and called it success, and I built those walls so high that my own family couldn't reach. Catherine reached over and took his hand, and Sarah saw him grip it like a lifeline. You're tearing those walls down now, Catherine said. That's what matters. It's not easy. Some days I'm so angry at you I can barely look at you. Angry for all the times you chose work over us, for the pride that kept us apart even after I left, for the 8 months our boys suffered. Her voice trembled but remained steady. But then I remembered that I made choices too, ran instead of fighting harder. I let my own pride keep me from reaching out when things got desperate. We both failed them. We both have to do better. Sarah felt like she was witnessing something intensely private, but neither Marcus nor Catherine seemed uncomfortable with her presence. If anything, they seemed to need a witness, someone outside their family to see and validate their struggle. Do you think you can make it work? Sarah asked quietly. Can you rebuild after everything that's happened? Catherine was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee. I don't know, she said finally, her honesty stark and painful. I love Marcus. I've loved him since the day we met. But love isn't always enough. Trust takes time to rebuild. The boys are our priority now. Everything else, our marriage, our future, it all has to serve what's best for them. Marcus's face showed the pain of hearing this, the uncertainty of his place in his own family's future, but he nodded. Whatever you need, Catherine, however long it takes. I'm not going anywhere. I'll spend the rest of my life proving I've changed, if that's what it takes. Catherine looked at him, and Sarah saw the complexity of emotion in her eyes. Love and hurt and hope and fear all tangled together. I know you will, Catherine said softly. I see you trying. The boys see it too. That's something. It's a start. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling, the weight of their shared history hanging in the air. Then Catherine turned to Sarah. Tell me about you, she said. Marcus said you work at La Maison Dorée, but that can't be all you are. What are your dreams, Sarah? What do you want from life? The question caught Sarah off guard. She'd been so focused on survival for so long that dreams had seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. I wanted to be a teacher once, she said slowly. I love children. I love the idea of helping them learn, helping them grow. But after my father died, college became impossible. The debt was too much and I had to help my mother, so I waited tables instead. It's honest work, but it's not. Paused, searching for words. It's not what I dreamed of. Catherine leaned forward, her eyes intent. What if you could go back to school now? But what if that dream wasn't dead, just delayed? Sarah shook her head. I'm 28, I'd be starting over. It would take years. So take years, Marcus said, speaking up for the first time in a while. You have time, and now you have the means. No rent, no car payment, no debt. You could go to school full-time if you wanted. I could, Sarah said, the possibility unfurling in her mind like a flower opening. The idea was both exhilarating and terrifying. You should, Catherine said firmly. Life is too short to live someone else's dream or no dream at all. Trust me, I know. I spent years watching Marcus chase his ambitions while I put mine on hold. I told myself I was supporting him, supporting the family, but really I was hiding. I was afraid to want things for myself. Don't make that mistake. Sarah felt something shift inside her, a door opening that she'd thought was permanently sealed. Maybe, she said, maybe I could. The conversation drifted to other topics, lighter ones. Catherine told stories about the boys when they were younger, about Michael's first day of school, and James's obsession with dinosaurs. Marcus shared memories of his own childhood, growing up with a demanding father who had built the company Marcus now ran, or had run, until he'd stepped back. He talked about the pressure he'd felt to exceed his father's achievements, to prove himself worthy of the family name. I thought success would make me happy, he said. I thought if I just accomplished enough, earned enough, built something grand enough, I'd feel satisfied. But it was never enough. There was always another goal, another competitor to beat, another mountain to climb. I was on a treadmill of my own making, and I couldn't get off. Until you lost everything, Sarah said. Until you lost the things that actually mattered. Marcus met her eyes. Exactly. It took losing my family to realize they were the only success that ever mattered. Everything else, the money, the power, the reputation, it's all just noise, just distraction from what's real. He looked at Catherine. I know I can't undo the past. I can't give back the time I wasted or erase the pain I caused, but I can choose differently now. I can be present. I can show up. I can love you and our sons the way you deserve to be loved. Not with money or grand gestures, but with my time, my attention, my whole heart. Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. That's all I ever wanted, she said. Just you. The real you. Not the corporate titan or the ambitious mogul. Just Marcus, the man I fell in love with. The man who used to make me laugh, who would stay up all night talking about his dreams and mine, who saw me as more than a wife or a mother, but as a whole person. I want that man back. I'm here, Marcus said, his voice rough with emotion. I'm right here, and I'm not leaving. They looked at each other, and Sarah felt she was witnessing a turning point, a moment when two people who had been lost found their way back to the path they'd strayed from. It wasn't a happy ending. Not yet. There was still too much hurt, too much to work through, but it was a beginning, a chance. A fragile, precious hope. Sarah stayed for another hour, and when she finally left, both Marcus and Catherine walked her to her car. Thank you, Catherine said, hugging her again. Not just for saving our boys, but for reminding us what kindness looks like, for showing us that strangers can care when we've forgotten how to care for each other. Sarah hugged her back, feeling the bones too close to the surface, the fragility that came from illness and hardship. Take care of yourself, she said, and take care of each other. Marcus shook her hand, then pulled her into a brief, awkward hug. You're part of our family now, he said. Whether you want to be or not, you're stuck with us. Sarah drove home that night with her heart full, the image of that fractured but healing family etched in her mind. She thought about Catherine's words, about not putting dreams on hold, about life being too short to live without purpose. When she got back to her new apartment, she sat at her small desk and opened her laptop. She found the website for the local university and began reading about their education program, the requirements, the courses, the timeline. It would take 3 years to complete her degree. 3 years felt like forever, and no time at all. She filled out an application that night, her fingers trembling over the keys as she typed her personal statement. She wrote about her father, about the years of struggle, about the two boys in the doorway who had changed everything. She wrote about wanting to make a difference, about believing that education was the key to breaking cycles of poverty and despair. When she hit submit, it felt like stepping off a cliff. Exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. 2 weeks later, she received her acceptance letter. She stared at it for a full hour, reading it over and over, unable to quite believe it was real. She called Marcus immediately, her voice shaking with excitement and fear. I got in, she said. I'm going back to school. His joy was genuine and immediate. Sarah, that's wonderful. I'm so proud of you. When do you start? In the fall semester, she said. I have 4 months to prepare. 4 months to figure out if I can actually do this. You can, Marcus said with absolute certainty. You're one of the strongest people I know. You're going to be an amazing teacher. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, for believing in me, for making this possible. You made it possible, he corrected gently. You saved my sons. All I did was remove some obstacles. The courage, the determination, that's all you. The months between that conversation and the start of the semester passed in a blur. Sarah gave notice at La Maison Dorée, and Philip threw her a small farewell party. The other waitstaff gave her a card and a gift certificate, and several of them told her they admired her courage. You're doing what we all dream about, one of them said. You're getting out. Don't forget us when you're a fancy teacher. Sarah promised she wouldn't, and she meant it. These people had been her community during the hardest years of her life. She would never forget them. She stayed in touch with the Thornhill family, visiting every few weeks for dinner. She watched as the boys grew more confident, more secure. Michael's too serious expressions softened, and she saw him laugh more often, saw him act like the child he should have been all along. James lost the haunted look in his eyes, and his enthusiasm for life returned in full force. He chattered constantly, asked a million questions, and hugged everyone indiscriminately. The relationship between Marcus and Catherine evolved slowly, carefully. They were like two people learning a new dance, occasionally stepping on each other's toes but committed to getting it right. Marcus had kept his promise to step back from the company. He went to every therapy session, every school event, every bedtime. He was there, present and engaged in a way he'd never been before. Catherine watched him with cautious hope, and Sarah could see her slowly beginning to trust again. They weren't sleeping in the same room yet. Catherine had confessed to Sarah during one visit, but they were talking, really talking, in ways they hadn't in years. It's hard, she said. Some days I look at him and I'm so angry about everything we lost, but then I see him with the boys, see how he's changed, and I remember why I fell in love with him. One evening in late August, a week before Sarah's classes were set to begin, Marcus called her with an unusual request. Sarah, I need a favor, he said. It's a big one, and you can absolutely say no, but I'm hoping you'll say yes. What is it? She asked, immediately curious. There's a gala next week, a charity event for homeless youth. Normally I'd skip it, you know how I feel about those things now, but this year's different. They're honoring the work being done to help kids like Michael and James, kids who fall through the cracks. The boys want to go. They want to speak, to tell their story, to help other kids, but they're nervous. They asked if he would come with us for moral support. Sarah's heart clenched. They want me there? Of course they do, Marcus said warmly. Your family, Sarah. You're the person who saw them when everyone else looked away. They trust you. And honestly, Catherine and I would feel better having you there too. This is a big step for them, confronting what happened. Telling the world. We could use your strength. Sarah didn't hesitate. I'll be there, she said. Whatever they need. The night of the gala arrived with surprising speed. Sarah dressed in a gown she'd bought for the occasion. A simple but elegant navy dress that made her feel both sophisticated and uncomfortable. She'd never been to anything like this. An event where wealth and power gathered to congratulate themselves on their charity while sipping champagne that cost more than she used to make in a week. But she was going for the boys, for Michael and James, and that made it bearable. Marcus sent a car for her, and when she arrived at the hotel ballroom where the event was being held, she was overwhelmed by the opulence. Crystal chandeliers, elaborate floral arrangements, women in designer gowns and men in perfect tuxedos. She felt like an imposter, but then she saw Marcus waving to her from across the room, and she made her way over to where he stood with Catherine and the boys. Michael and James were dressed in small suits, looking heartbreakingly grown up and vulnerable. When they saw Sarah, their faces lit up, and James ran to her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You came," he said, his voice muffled against her dress. "I was worried you wouldn't come." "I promised I would," Sarah said, kneeling down to look him in the eye. "I always keep my promises, just like your dad." Catherine hugged her, looking elegant in a deep green gown that brought color to her still too pale face. "Thank you for being here," she said quietly. "This is harder than we expected. The boys are scared. And honestly, so am I." Sarah squeezed her hand. "You're all going to be amazing. Your story matters. It's going to help people." The evening progressed with speeches and awards, a silent auction and networking that Marcus navigated with practiced ease, though Sarah noticed he stayed close to his family, his hand often resting on one of the boys' shoulders. Finally, the moment came. The MC, a polished woman in a red dress, took the microphone and began speaking about the epidemic of missing and homeless children, about the failures of the system, about the importance of community and vigilance. And then she introduced the Thornhill family. Marcus went up first, taking the microphone with steady hands. He looked out at the sea of faces, many of them people he knew, colleagues and competitors, people who'd watched his rise to power and his recent withdrawal with equal fascination. When he spoke, his voice was clear and strong. "8 months ago, my sons disappeared," he began. "They were taken from me by circumstances I could have prevented, should have prevented, but I was too proud, too focused on things that didn't matter to see what was really important until it was almost too late." He told their story, not sparing himself, laying bare his failures as a father and a husband. He spoke about the months of searching, the desperation, the guilt that ate at him every single day, and then he spoke about the night they were found. "There's a woman here tonight," he said, his eyes finding Sarah in the crowd, a waitress who was working a double shift, exhausted and struggling with her own burdens. "She saw my sons outside in the freezing cold and she didn't look away. She didn't tell herself it wasn't her problem. She didn't think about the rules or the consequences. She saw 2 children in need and she opened the door and said, 'Come inside, boys.' 3 words that changed everything. 3 words that gave me my family back." The ballroom was utterly silent. Sarah felt hundreds of eyes turned toward her and she wanted to disappear. But Catherine reached over and took her hand, and Michael and James were looking at her with such love and gratitude that she forced herself to stay still, to accept the attention with grace. Marcus continued, "We live in a world where it's easier to look away than to get involved, where we tell ourselves that someone else will help, that it's not our responsibility, that we're too busy or too tired or too overwhelmed with our own problems." But Sarah Mitchell didn't look away, and because she didn't, my sons are alive. My family has a second chance. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not standing here tonight to be honored. I'm standing here to honor her. And to honor every person who chooses compassion over convenience, who sees suffering and decides to act. And I'm standing here to tell you that my sons want to share their story, because they believe it can help other kids who are lost and scared and hoping someone will see them." He stepped back and Catherine came forward with the boys. Michael approached the microphone first, his young face serious and determined. Sarah could see his hands shaking, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "My name is Michael Thornhill, and I'm 9 years old. For 8 months, my brother and I lived on the streets. We were cold and hungry and scared all the time. We slept in doorways and under bridges. People walked past us every day, and most of them didn't even look at us. We were invisible." The stark honesty of his words hit the audience like a physical blow. Women in designer gowns dabbed at their eyes. Men in expensive tuxedos shifted uncomfortably. Michael continued, his voice gaining strength. "But one night a lady saw us. Miss Sarah saw us, and she didn't pretend we weren't there. She brought us inside where it was warm, and because she did, we found our dad." He looked at Sarah, his dark eyes shining. "She saved our lives, and now my brother and I want to help save other kids." James stepped up to the microphone then, and Marcus had to lower it for his smaller stature. "I'm James, and I'm 7. I want to tell all the kids who are lost that someone is looking for you. Someone loves you. Don't give up. And I want to tell all the grown-ups that kids need you to see them. Even when it's hard, even when you're tired, please see them." The simplicity of his plea, delivered in his small, earnest voice, was devastating. Sarah saw people openly crying now, saw the shock and shame on faces that were used to seeing poverty as an abstract problem, something to be solved with donations and gailas, not something that touched real children with real fear. The applause when the Thornhill family returned to their seats was thunderous, and Sarah found herself swept up in the emotion of the moment, crying and clapping along with everyone else. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and introductions. People approached the Thornhill family constantly, some offering genuine support and admiration, others clearly seeking to associate themselves with the compelling story. Marcus handled it all with surprising grace, but Sarah could see the strain on Catherine's face, the way the boys were beginning to wilt under the attention. She stayed close, providing a buffer when needed, deflecting particularly intrusive questions, and finally suggesting they slip out before the event officially ended. Marcus agreed immediately, grateful for the escape route. They left through a side door, avoiding the crowd, and stood in the cool night air, breathing deeply. "That was intense," Catherine said, leaning against Marcus for support. "I'm proud of you boys. You were so brave up there." Michael shrugged, trying to look nonchalant, but Sarah could see the relief on his face that it was over. "It was okay," he said. "If it helps other kids, it was worth it." James was quieter, and when Sarah knelt down beside him, she saw exhaustion in his young face. "You did great, buddy," she said softly. "Your words were perfect." James leaned against her, his small body heavy with fatigue. "Can we go home now?" he asked. "I'm really tired." They said their goodbyes, and Sarah watched the family climb into Marcus's car, a unit bound together by trauma and love and the hard work of healing. She took a cab back to her apartment, and as she changed out of her gown and into comfortable clothes, she thought about what Michael had said. If it helps other kids, it was worth it. That was the heart of it, wasn't it? Using your pain to prevent someone else's, transforming suffering into purpose. Classes began the following week, and Sarah found herself immersed in a world she'd thought was lost to her forever. The university campus was beautiful, full of young students who seemed impossibly optimistic and carefree. At 28, Sarah felt ancient compared to her 18 and 19-year-old classmates, but she also felt focused in a way they weren't. She knew why she was there, what she wanted to accomplish. She wasn't exploring options or finding herself. She was building a future deliberately and purposefully. Her professors noticed her dedication immediately. She sat in the front row, took meticulous notes, stayed after class to ask questions. Her life experience gave her insights that her younger classmates lacked. When they discussed childhood development, she thought of Michael and James. When they talked about trauma-informed teaching, she understood viscerally what that meant. She visited her mother every week, and Eleanor's condition had stabilized in the better care facility. Some days were clearer than others, and on the good days, Eleanor would ask about school, would encourage Sarah with a lucidity that was bittersweet because Sarah knew it wouldn't last. "My brilliant girl," Eleanor would say, patting Sarah's hand. "I always knew you'd do something important." On the bad days, Eleanor didn't recognize her at all, called her by her sister's name, or seemed to think Sarah was still a child. Those days were harder, but Sarah had learned to find peace in them. She would sit with her mother, hold her hand, read aloud, and find comfort in the simple act of being present. The Thornhill family remained a constant in her life. She had dinner with them at least once a month, and the boys would call her sometimes just to tell her about their day, about a good grade on a test or a new friend they'd made. She watched as Catherine and Marcus navigated their way back to each other. It wasn't a straight path. There were arguments, moments of tension when old wounds reopened. But there was also laughter, affection, growing ease with each other that spoke of genuine healing. 6 months after the gala, Catherine confided in Sarah that she and Marcus had decided to renew their wedding vows. "Not a big ceremony," she said. "Just us, the boys, and a few close friends. But we want to make a new promise to each other. A better promise. One we can actually keep. I want you to be there, Sarah. Please." Sarah attended the small ceremony in the Thornhills' backyard on a beautiful spring afternoon. Michael and James stood beside their parents holding rings, their faces solemn with the importance of the moment. Marcus and Catherine spoke vows they'd written themselves, words that were raw and honest and full of hard-won wisdom. "I promise to see you," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "To really see you. Not as my wife or the mother of my children, but as the woman I fell in love with, complex and beautiful and deserving of my full attention. I promise to choose you every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Catherine's vows were equally powerful. "I promise to speak my truth, even when it scares me, to ask for what I need instead of hoping you'll guess. I promise to trust you, to give you the chance to show me you've changed, to believe that people can grow and heal and become better versions of themselves." When they kissed, sealing their new promises, Sarah saw the boys smile, saw the relief and joy on their young faces. This was what they'd needed all along. Not perfection, but presence. Not a family without problem, but a family willing to face those problems together. The first year of Sarah's program flew by in a whirlwind of classes. Student teaching, observation, late-night study session. She thrived in the academic environment, her grades excellent, her practical teaching skills developing rapidly. Her professors encouraged her to consider specializing in working with at-risk youth, with children who'd experienced trauma. "You have a gift," one of them told her. "You understand these kids in a way that can't be taught. Use that." Sarah began volunteering at a shelter for homeless families, working with the children there, helping them with homework, reading to them, providing a stable, caring presence in their chaotic lives. She saw Michael and James in every face, saw the fear and resilience, the hope battling against despair. She learned their stories, celebrated their small victories, and grieved with them over their setbacks. One girl in particular, a 10-year-old named Maria, whose family had been evicted from their apartment, reminded Sarah so much of herself at that age that it was almost painful. Maria was bright and determined, doing her homework by flashlight in the shelter, refusing to let her circumstances define her potential. Sarah worked with her every week, tutoring her, encouraging her, believing in her when Maria struggled to believe in herself. One afternoon, Marcus stopped by the shelter to pick Sarah up for a coffee date. He'd been supporting the shelter financially since learning of Sarah's volunteer work there, but this was his first time actually visiting. She watched as he walked through the common area, saw the discomfort and pain on his face as he observed the families living there, the children playing with worn toys, the exhaustion on the parents' faces. This could have been Michael and James, he said quietly when they were outside. If things had gone differently, if you hadn't seen them, they could have ended up in a place like this. Or worse. Sarah nodded. That's why I do it. Because every child deserves someone to see them, to believe in them, to give them a chance. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. I want to do more, he said finally. The shelter, it's overcrowded, underfunded. The facilities are inadequate. What if we changed that? What if we built something better? Sarah looked at him, seeing the determination in his face. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about Michael's words at the gala, about helping other kids. I've been donating money, but money isn't enough. I want to create something lasting. A facility specifically for families with children, with real resources, education programs, job training, mental health services. A place that doesn't just house people, but helps them rebuild their lives. And I want you to help me design it. The project consumed them both over the following months. Marcus assembled a team of architects, social workers, and educators. Sarah provided insight from her work at the shelter and her growing expertise in childhood education and trauma. Catherine joined the effort, bringing her social work background to bear on the mental health components. Even the boys participated, sharing their perspectives on what would have helped them during their time on the streets. The result was the Thornhill Family Center, a state-of-the-art facility that opened a year and a half after that night in the restaurant. It wasn't just a shelter. It was a comprehensive support system offering safe housing, on-site childcare, educational programs, job training, counseling services, and case management. It was designed to be a stepping stone, not a dead end, a place where families could catch their breath and build towards stability. Sarah walked through the completed facility the week before it opened, marveling at what had been created. There were bright, clean family units instead of crowded dormitory-style rooms. There was a learning center stocked with books and computers. There was a playground where children could be children, even in the midst of crisis. There was a community kitchen where families could cook together, regaining a sense of normalcy and dignity. In the main lobby, there was a plaque, the Thornhill Family Center. It read, "In honor of Michael and James Thornhill, who survived, and in gratitude to Sarah Mitchell, who saw." Sarah stood in front of that plaque and wept. The opening ceremony was attended by city officials, donors, and families who would be the first residents. Michael and James cut the ribbon, and James gave a short speech that he'd written himself. "This place is for kids like us," he said. "For families who need help. Nobody should have to be cold and scared and alone. Everybody deserves a safe place." The first family moved in that afternoon, a mother with 3 children who'd been living in their car for 2 months. Sarah helped them settle in, showed them where everything was, assured them that they were safe now. The gratitude in the mother's eyes was overwhelming, and Sarah thought about her own journey, about how one act of compassion had rippled outward, creating waves that touched lives she'd never met. She was in her final year of university now, student teaching at an elementary school, preparing for her certification exams, planning her future. She'd been offered a position at the school already, contingent on passing her exams, teaching 3rd grade. She would start in the fall, finally living the dream she'd thought was impossible. One evening, as she was preparing a lesson plan at her apartment, her phone rang. It was Catherine, and her voice was warm with excitement. "Sarah, are you free this weekend? We have news." "Good news," Sarah smiled. "Of course. What's going on?" "Come for dinner Saturday," Catherine said mysteriously. "Trust me, you'll want to hear this in person." Saturday arrived, and Sarah made the now familiar drive to the Thornhill home. The boys met her at the door, practically vibrating with barely contained excitement. "We have a surprise," James announced, grabbing her hand and pulling her inside. "You're going to love it." In the living room, Marcus and Catherine sat on the couch, and between them was a small, wriggling puppy, a golden retriever with a red bow around its neck. The boys had been begging for a dog for months, and clearly their parents had finally agreed. But that wasn't the only surprise. Catherine stood, and Sarah noticed for the first time the small but unmistakable swell of her belly. Sarah's eyes widened. Catherine laughed at her expression. "Surprise," she said. "We're pregnant. Due in 6 months. It wasn't planned, but it feels like a gift, like a new beginning for all of us." Sarah felt joy flood through her, and she rushed to embrace Catherine, mindful of her growing belly. "That's incredible," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so happy for you, for all of you." Marcus joined the embrace, then the boys, and finally even the puppy squirmed his way into the middle of the group hug. They spent the evening celebrating, talking about names and nursery colors and how the boys felt about becoming big brothers again. Michael was cautiously excited, worrying aloud about whether he'd be a good brother to a baby after everything that had happened. James was unequivocally thrilled, already planning all the things he would teach the new baby. "You'll both be wonderful," Sarah assured them. "You're kind and brave, and you know what it means to protect someone you love. That baby's going to be so lucky." The months that followed were full of transition and growth for everyone. Sarah completed her final semester with honors and passed her certification exams on the first attempt. Her professors celebrated her achievement, and several of them told her they expected great things from her career. The elementary school where she'd done her student teaching officially offered her the third-grade position, and she accepted with a mixture of excitement and terror. This was it, the dream she'd thought was dead, finally becoming reality. Her first day as a real teacher arrived in late August, and she stood in her classroom arranging desks and hanging posters, her heart racing with anticipation. 22 8 and 9-year-olds would be in her care, looking to her for guidance, education, and support. The responsibility felt enormous, but she was ready. Her students were a diverse group, some from stable, supportive homes, others dealing with challenges that broke her heart. There was a boy whose father was deployed overseas, a girl in foster care, twins whose mother worked 3 jobs to make ends meet, and Maria, the girl from the shelter who had reminded Sarah so much of herself. Maria's family had graduated from the Thornhill Family Center after 8 months, her mother having found stable employment and an affordable apartment. But the trauma of homelessness still lingered, and Maria struggled with anxiety and trust. Sarah worked with her patiently, creating a safe space in the classroom where vulnerability was respected and mistakes were opportunities for growth. She watched Maria slowly begin to flourish, her natural brightness emerging as she felt more secure. One afternoon in October, Sarah looked up from helping a student with a math problem to see Marcus standing in her classroom doorway. She smiled and walked over to him, curious about the unexpected visit. "Miss Thornhill, what brings you here? Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," he assured her. "Better than fine, actually. Catherine went into labor this morning. We have a daughter." Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh my goodness. Congratulations. How's Catherine? How's the baby?" "Both healthy," Marcus said, and his smile was radiant. "She's perfect, Sarah. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, with her mother's eyes and apparently her father's lung. The boys are at the hospital now, completely smitten. We'd like you to come meet her when your day ends, if you can." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Of course I'll come. I'd be honored." That evening, she walked into Catherine's hospital room and found a scene of perfect domestic joy. Catherine was propped up in bed, looking exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a pink blanket. Michael and James were sitting on either side of the bed, their faces full of wonder as they gazed at their new sister. Marcus sat in a chair nearby, his expression one of complete contentment. When Catherine saw Sarah, she beckoned her over. "Come meet Grace," said softly. "Grace Mitchell Thornhill." Sarah felt her breath catch. "You named her after me?" Catherine's eyes were warm. "Her middle name, yes. You gave us our family back, Sarah. You gave us this second chance. We wanted her to carry a piece of you with her always, a reminder of the kindness that saved us." Sarah approached the bed and looked down at the baby's face. Small and perfect and infinitely precious. Grace's eyes were closed, her tiny fist curled against her cheek. She was beautiful, a symbol of everything this family had survived and overcome. "Can I hold her?" Sarah asked, and Catherine carefully transferred the baby into her arms. Grace was warm and solid, her small body radiating life and possibility. Sarah looked at this new life, this child who would grow up in a family that had learned the hard way what mattered, and she felt overwhelming hope for the future. "Hello, Grace," she whispered. "Welcome to the world. You're surrounded by people who love you so much." The baby made a small sound, and Sarah's heart melted completely. She stayed for an hour, holding Grace, talking quietly with the family, watching the boys take turns carefully touching their sister's tiny hand. This was what redemption looked like, she thought. Not a grand gesture or a dramatic moment, but this quiet room full of love and second chances. When she finally left, driving home through the dark streets, she thought about the chain of events that had led to this moment. 2 freezing boys, a door opened, a family reunited, and now a new life beginning with hope instead of fear. The Thornhill Family Center was thriving, serving dozens of families each month. Sarah received regular updates from the staff about families who graduated the program, finding stable housing and employment, rebuilding their lives. The success rate was remarkable, far higher than traditional shelters, because the model addressed not just immediate need but systemic barriers. Children were staying in school, parents were finding jobs, families were staying together. One particularly moving story involved a single father with 2 daughters who had lost his job and subsequently his apartment. He'd been terrified of losing his children to the foster system and had been living in his car for 3 weeks when he found the Thornhill Center. The staff helped him access job training, mental health services, and childcare while he attended interviews. Within 2 months, he had a new job with better pay than his previous one. Within 4 months, he'd saved enough for an apartment deposit. His daughters never missed a day of school during the transition, and when he graduated the program, he stood at a small ceremony and said, said. This place didn't just give us a roof, it gave us our dignity back, it gave us hope. Marcus had attended that ceremony, and Sarah knew it had affected him deeply. She saw him continuing to change, to grow, to become more engaged with the world beyond his business empire. Sarah's own work with her students was deeply fulfilling. She saw them grow and learn, watched shy children become confident, struggled alongside those who faced challenges, and celebrated every small victory. Maria, in particular, made remarkable progress. Her anxiety decreased as the school year progressed, and she began to raise her hand in class, to volunteer answers, to make friends. One day in late winter, Maria stayed after class to talk to Sarah. "Miss Mitchell," she said, her voice soft but determined, "I want to be a teacher when I grow up, like you. I want to help kids who are scared like I was." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back and smiled at Maria. "You're going to be an amazing teacher," she said. "You have something special, Maria. You understand what it's like to struggle, and that empathy is going to make you incredible at this." Spring came, and with it, Sarah's first year of teaching drew to a close. She'd survived, more than survived, she'd thrived. Her principal had already asked her to return for the following year, and several parents had specifically requested their younger children be placed in her class. She'd found her calling, the thing she was meant to do, and it filled her with a sense of purpose she'd never experienced in all her years of waitressing. On the last day of school, her students gave her cards and small gifts, and Maria gave her a drawing. It showed a woman standing in a doorway with light streaming out behind her and two small figures approaching. Above it, in careful lettering, Maria had written, "Sometimes angels look like regular people. Thank you for being mine." That summer, Sarah took a trip she'd been planning for months. She drove to her hometown, a place she hadn't visited since her father's funeral over a decade ago. She went to the cemetery where he was buried and stood in front of his modest headstone. "Dad," she said aloud, feeling foolish but needing to speak, "I did it. I became a teacher, just like you always wanted. I know you'd be proud." She told him about the Thornhill family, about the boys she'd saved, about the center that bore their name. She told him about Grace, about Maria, about all the ways one moment of compassion had rippled outward, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. "I learned something," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You taught me, even though you've been gone so long, you taught me that kindness matters, that seeing people matters, that we're all connected in ways we don't always understand." She left flowers on his grave and drove back to the city feeling lighter, as if she'd closed a circle that had been open too long. When she got home, there was a message from Marcus on her phone. "Sarah, call me when you can. Nothing urgent, but I have something I want to discuss with you." She called him back, and he answered immediately. "Sarah, thanks for calling back. Listen, I've been thinking about the center and its future. We're looking at expansion, possibly opening a second location. But more than that, I want to formalize the educational program, create a real curriculum for the children staying there, something that addresses trauma and builds resilience. And I can't think of anyone better to develop and oversee that program than you." Sarah was stunned. "Me? But I've only been teaching for a year. I'm still learning." "That's exactly why you're perfect for it," Marcus said. "You haven't forgotten what it's like to struggle. You haven't become jaded or burned out. You still see each child as an individual with potential, not as a problem to be solved. And you have the educational expertise now to back up your instincts. Think about it, Sarah. You could help design something that changes the trajectory for hundreds, maybe thousands of kids. You could take what you learned from Michael and James, from Maria, from all your students, and build a model that others could replicate." The opportunity was staggering, both exciting and terrifying. "I'll need to think about it," she said. "Talk to my principal, see if there's a way to do both. I don't want to leave my classroom." "You wouldn't have to," Marcus assured her. "We could work around your teaching schedule. Maybe you develop the curriculum during the summer, train the staff, and then oversee implementation part-time during the school year. We'd make it work, Sarah, because this is important. You're important." She promised to consider it seriously, and over the following weeks she did. She talked to Catherine, who enthusiastically supported the idea. She talked to her principal, who helped her see how the experiences would complement each other. And she talked to her mother during one of Eleanor's clear days, and Eleanor had smiled and said, "My girl, changing the world one child at a time, just like I always knew you would." In the end, Sarah said yes. She agreed to develop the educational curriculum for the Thornhill Family Center, working during her summer break and consulting part-time during the school year. The work was challenging and deeply meaningful, drawing on everything she'd learned as a teacher and everything she'd witnessed as someone who'd lived on the edge of poverty herself. She created a program that addressed not just academic skills, but emotional resilience, that taught children how to process trauma while building their confidence and capability. She trained staff members who worked directly with the family, helping them understand that education wasn't just about worksheets and test scores, but about restoring hope and opening possibilities. The program launched that fall, serving the children at the center while Sarah continued teaching her third-grade class. She found a rhythm, exhausting but fulfilling, dividing her time between two groups of children who needed her in different ways. Her own students continued to thrive under her care, and word of her teaching style spread. Parents requested her specifically, and other teachers sought her advice. At the center, she watched children who had come in defeated and afraid begin to believe in themselves again. She saw test scores improve, but more importantly, she saw smiles return. Heard laughter in the learning center, witnessed kids dreaming about their futures instead of just surviving their present. 2 years after that transformative night in the restaurant, Sarah stood in the learning center at the Thornhill Family Family Center on a warm evening in May. The space was filled with families gathered for a special ceremony. They were celebrating the 10th family to graduate from the program, a milestone that felt significant. Marcus stood at a small podium, baby Grace perched on his hip, her chubby hands playing with his tie. Catherine sat in the front row, flanked by Michael and James, now 11 and 9, growing into young men who carried their past with dignity and used it to fuel compassion for others. Michael volunteered at the center twice a month, helping younger kids with homework. James had started a donation drive at his school, collecting coats and blankets for homeless children. Marcus spoke about the center's mission, about the families they'd serve, about the statistics that showed real, measurable change in their community. But then his voice softened and he shifted Grace to his other hip so he could gesture towards Sarah. None of this would exist, he said, if not for one person's willingness to see 2 children in need and act without hesitation. Sarah Mitchell opened a door on the coldest night of the year and said 3 simple words that changed everything. "Come inside, boys." She didn't know those boys were mine. She didn't know what it would mean. She simply saw suffering and chose compassion. That choice saved my sons, saved my family, and inspired everything we built here. He paused, his eyes finding Sarah's in the crowd. But Sarah did more than save my family. She reminded me what it means to be human, to see people, really see them, not as problems or inconveniences, but as individuals worthy of dignity and care. Before that night, I walked past people in need every single day. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility, that someone else would help, that I had more important things to worry about, but the truth is I had stopped seeing people at all. I had built walls around myself so high that I couldn't see the world beyond my own narrow concern. Sarah tore those walls down, not with judgment or lectures, but simply by showing me what genuine compassion looks like. The families in the audience were nodding, many of them crying. They understood what he was saying because they'd been on the other side of it, invisible to the world until someone finally saw them. Marcus continued, "Every family that comes through these doors now is seen. They're treated with respect, given resources and support, offered a genuine chance to rebuild. And that happens because Sarah taught us how to see people the way she saw my sons. Not as statistics or charity cases, but as human beings deserving of hope." The room erupted in applause, and Sarah felt her face flush with emotion and embarrassment. She'd never been comfortable with public recognition, had always felt that she'd simply done what anyone should do. But looking around at the faces in the room, at the families whose lives had been changed, at the children who were no longer invisible, she understood that it did matter. Every choice mattered. Every moment of compassion created ripples that extended far beyond what any individual could see. After the ceremony, Sarah mingled with the families, listening to their stories, celebrating their victories. One mother, who had entered the program 6 months earlier after fleeing domestic violence with her 2 children, grabbed Sarah's hand. "My daughter loves your reading program," she said, tears in her eyes. "She's been through so much, seen things no child should see. But when she's in that learned center with the books you picked out, when she's being read to by your volunteers, I see her smile. I see her be a kid again. You gave me my daughter back, not the scared, traumatized version, but the real her, the one I was afraid we'd lost forever." Sarah hugged her, feeling the weight of gratitude and responsibility. "That's what we're here for," she said, "to give children a chance to be children again, to learn and grow and dream." As the evening wound down and families began to leave, Sarah found herself alone in the learning center with the Thornhill family. Michael and James were showing Grace the books on the shelves, Michael reading titles in a gentle voice while Grace babbled and pointed. Catherine came to stand beside Sarah, watching the children with a soft smile. "Can you believe it's been 2 years?" she said. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday, that night at the restaurant, and sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago. We're so different now, all of us." Sarah nodded. "You've built something beautiful," she said. "Not just this center, but your family. You fought for each other, did the hard work, and look at you now." Catherine took her hand. "We couldn't have done it without you. You were the catalyst, Sarah. You set everything in motion. But more than that, you've been our friend, our inspiration, our reminder of what matters. Kept us honest, kept us focused on what really matters." Marcus joined them, Grace now asleep on his shoulder, her small face peaceful in slumber. "I have something for you," he said to Sarah, reaching into his pocket with his free hand. He pulled out a small velvet box and handed it to her. "Open it." Sarah opened the box and found a delicate necklace inside, a simple gold chain with a small pendant. The pendant was shaped like a door, open just slightly, with light seeming to emanate from within. On the back was an inscription. She turned it over and read the words engraved there. "Come inside, boys. 5 to 14. The date of that transformative night." "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But it's too much." "You've already given me so much," Marcus shook his head. "You gave us everything. Let us give you this. A reminder that one moment of compassion can change the world. That seeing people, really seeing them, is the most important thing any of us can do." Catherine helped Sarah put on the necklace, and Sarah touched the pendant, feeling its weight against her chest over her heart. She would wear it always, she decided, a reminder not of what she'd done, but of what anyone could do if they chose to see, to act, to care. The Thornhill family left soon after, and Sarah walked through the quiet center, turning off lights, checking that everything was secure for the night. She paused in front of a wall that had been decorated by the children currently staying at the center. It was covered with drawings and paintings, expressions of hope and fear and dreams. One drawing caught her eye, made by a 6-year-old boy who had arrived at the center just 2 weeks earlier with his mother and baby sister. The drawing showed a house with a bright red door, and standing in the doorway was a figure with arms outstretched in welcome. Above it, in shaky printing, the boy had written, "Home is where someone sees you." Sarah felt the truth of those words settle into her bones. Home is where someone sees you, not just acknowledges your presence, but truly sees you, recognizes your humanity, cares about your suffering, celebrates your joy. She had given that gift to Michael and James on a freezing night 2 years ago, but in truth, they had given it to her as well. They had seen her, not as just a waitress serving coffee, but as someone capable of making a difference. Their family had seen her potential when she'd forgotten it herself, had believed in her dreams when she'd stopped believing. They had welcomed her into their lives, into their struggles and triumphs, and in doing so had given her a home in the deepest sense of the word. She locked up the center and walked to her car, the warm spring air soft against her skin, so different from that brutal winter night that had changed everything. She thought about the journey she'd been on, from struggling waitress to teacher to program developer, about her mother, now comfortable and cared for in her final years, about Maria and her other students, about all the children at the center, about the ripples of compassion spreading outward in ways she could never fully measure. She thought about Marcus, transformed from an emotionally distant workaholic into a present, engaged father and husband, about Catherine, who had fought for her family and won, about Michael and James, who had survived the unimaginable and were using their experience to help others. As she drove home, Sarah touched the pendant at her throat, feeling its reassuring weight. 3 words, she thought. "Come inside, boys." 3 words spoken without thought, driven by pure instinct and compassion. 3 words that had saved 2 lives, reunited a family, inspired a program that was changing dozens more lives, and reminded everyone who heard the story that we are all connected, all responsible for each other, all capable of making a difference. The world was full of closed doors, of people walking past suffering, of individuals too busy or too overwhelmed or too frightened to see the need right in front of them. But it was also full of people who, when faced with a choice, chose compassion, who opened doors instead of closing them, who saw instead of looking away, who said, "Come inside," instead of "Not my problem." Sarah had learned that she had always possessed the power to change lives long before she had a degree or a career or financial stability. That power lived in every human heart, waiting to be exercised. The power to see, the power to care, the power to act. It didn't require wealth or status or special training. It just required willingness, the simple, profound willingness to recognize another person's humanity and respond to it. She pulled into her apartment building's parking lot and sat for a moment in the quiet car, reflecting on how far she'd come and how far she still had to go. There were more children to teach, more families to help, more doors to open. The work was never finished, but that was okay. It was the work itself that mattered, the daily choice to see people, to honor their dignity, to offer hope where there was despair. Tomorrow she would return to her classroom and teach 22 third graders about math and reading and science. She would help Maria continue to blossom, would encourage a shy boy to speak up, would patiently work with a struggling student until concepts clicked. Tomorrow evening she would go to the center and work with the curriculum development team, refining lessons, training staff, ensuring that every child who walked through those doors received not just education, but affirmation of their worth. Tomorrow and every day after, she would live out the lessons she'd learned on that cold winter night. That kindness is never wasted, that compassion creates ripples that extend far beyond our vision, that every person we encounter is an opportunity to open a door, to welcome someone in from the cold, to say with our actions, if not our words, "You matter, I see you, come inside." The pendant gleamed in the dim light of the parking lot. A small golden door opened to possibility. Sarah smiled, touched it once more, and got out of her car. She had work to do, children to teach, lives to touch, and it all began with 3 simple words and the willingness to mean them. Come inside, boys. Come inside and let me show you that you are seen, you are valued, you are home.